He married her for revenge until she nearly died saving him, and he finally discovered the truth. A true story. Some people enter your life and you never fully recover from them. Not because they were cruel, sometimes because they were kind. And sometimes, the cruelest thing one person can do to another is marry them while knowing, in their heart, that it wasn't love that brought them to the altar. This is one of those stories. Rayan was 34 years old when he decided to get married. Not because he was lonely, not because he had found the right person. He got married because it was the cleanest way to destroy someone who had destroyed his family, and the cleanest way to reach that someone was through his daughter. Her name was Zara, and she had no idea. To understand what Rayan did, and why, you have to go back about 15 years. Back to when Rayan was 19 years old, and his family still had a home, a business, and a future that felt real. His father had built a small but steady construction firm over the course of 20 years. It wasn't a big company. It wasn't going to make anyone famous. But it was honest work, and it paid the bills, and it made Rayan's father feel like he had done something worth doing with his life. He was proud of it. He talked about it at dinner. He pointed at buildings from the car window and said, "We did that one." Then he went into business with Zara's father. The two men had known each other for years. They were not close friends, but they trusted each other the way people in a community trust each other, because they've shaken hands enough times, because they've eaten at the same tables, because there was no particular reason not to. Zara's father was a business-minded man, good with numbers, good with words. The partnership seemed like it made sense. It didn't. Rayan never knew the full story until much later. What he knew, at 19, was this. Money that was supposed to be shared wasn't. Payments that were supposed to go to both companies went to one. His father tried to raise the issue quietly, then not so quietly. By the time lawyers were mentioned, the damage was already done. Rayan's father's company was bleeding money it didn't have. Debts piled up. Contracts fell through. Within 2 years, the business that had taken 20 years to build was gone. What happened after that, Rayan has never spoken about in public. He keeps it to himself, locked in a part of his chest where he doesn't let many people reach. But people who knew his family during that time will tell you that the man who came out on the other side of that financial collapse was not the same man who went in. His father started drinking, he got quieter, he got smaller. And then, a few years after everything fell apart, his heart gave out. Rayan's mother held the family together for as long as she could. She took whatever work she could find. She made sure Rayan's younger brother Omar stayed in school. She never complained. Not once. Not in front of her sons. But Rayan could see it on her face. The exhaustion, the weight of it, the quiet grief of a woman who had expected a different life and was trying not to be bitter about the one she got instead. She passed away when Rayan was 22. Overwork, the doctors said. Stress. Her body just gave out. Rayan stood at her grave on a gray winter morning and made himself a promise. He wasn't even sure he said it out loud, but he felt it settle in his bones the way cold does, deep and permanent and not going anywhere. He promised that Zara's father would one day feel what it was like to lose everything. The years passed. Rayan rebuilt. He was smart, he was driven, and honestly, he had nothing else to do with his time. No family left to go home to. No real relationships. Nothing he cared about more than work. He built a real estate business that started small and grew steadily. He was careful with money in the way that people are careful when they have seen what happens when money disappears. By the time he was 30, he was doing well. By 34, he was doing very well. And Zara's father's company, which had once been healthy, was starting to slow down. Age, bad decisions, a changing market. The old man was not as sharp as he used to be. The company was vulnerable. Rayan had been watching, quietly, patiently, the way someone watches when they have been waiting a long time and have learned not to rush. He started buying shares. Small amounts at first, spread across different accounts, nothing that would raise flags. He knew how to be invisible when he needed to. He also knew that the cleanest way to take control of a company is through relationships, not just money. You need people who trust you inside the organization. You need access. And the easiest access was Zara. He'd seen her at a few business events over the years. He knew who she was. She was the old man's daughter, warm-faced, well-liked, worked somewhere in the non-profit sector. She didn't work for her father's company. She had her own life. She was, by all accounts, a good person. That fact did not stop him. He told himself she was not the target. The target was her father. She was just the path. He arranged to be at the same events she attended. He was charming when he needed to be. He had learned that too over the years, how to be easy to talk to, how to make someone feel heard. He did not rush. He did not push. He let months pass while they built what looked, from the outside, like a natural friendship slowly becoming something more. What he did not expect, what he truly did not account for, was that Zara was one of the most genuinely kind people he had ever spent time with. Not in a soft, naive way. She was not someone who didn't notice things. She noticed plenty. She just chose, over and over again, to respond with warmth instead of defensiveness. She listened when people talked. She remembered things. She showed up when people needed her. And she had, which Rayan noticed slowly, uncomfortably, in the way you notice something you would rather not, a very quiet, steady strength about her. He asked her to dinner. One dinner became several. Several became months. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, something shifted in Rayan that he did not want to look at directly. So he didn't. He told himself it was just familiarity. He told himself he was simply good at his job. 4 months after they had started spending real time together, he proposed. She said yes. She was crying. Happy tears. The kind that come when something feels right, not just good. She told him later that she'd had a feeling about him from the beginning, that something in her had recognized him, even before she knew why. Rayan stood there and received all of that, and said nothing about what was really in his heart. His younger brother Omar pulled him aside before the wedding. Omar had always been the more straightforward of the two, less guarded, quicker to say the difficult thing. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is," Omar said. Rayan told him it was under control. "That's not what I asked," Omar said. Rayan didn't answer. Omar didn't push further. But he looked at his older brother with an expression that Rayan recognized and didn't like, concern that had given up on becoming a conversation. The early months of the marriage were strange. Not terrible, not good, strange. Rayan was not a bad husband in the obvious ways. He wasn't unkind, he wasn't harsh, but he was distant in a way that Zara couldn't quite name. There was a wall somewhere behind his eyes, and no matter how many conversations they had, how many quiet evenings at home, she couldn't find the door in it. She adapted. She was good at adapting. She had grown up in a family that valued keeping the peace, and she had learned early how to make room around another person's silences without being swallowed by them. She cooked. She filled the apartment with small things that made it feel lived in. She made friends with his habits and worked around the ones she couldn't quite reach. But she was not oblivious. She noticed that Rayan tensed every time her father called. She noticed the files on his desk, documents with both their family names on them, dates going back years, numbers that didn't add up to anything she'd been told. She noticed that he was quietly, methodically doing something that involved her father's company, and she noticed that he never mentioned any of it to her. She told herself she was probably reading too much into things. She told herself she trusted him. She told herself, and this is the one she returned to most, that everyone has things they're not ready to talk about yet, and that patience was sometimes the right answer. She was patient, for a while. About 6 months into the marriage, she came home early one afternoon and heard him on the phone in the study. She wasn't trying to listen. She was just walking down the hallway when the words reached her. His voice was quiet, but not quiet enough. She caught pieces: her father's name, the company's name, something about controlling interest, and then a phrase that stopped her mid-step, right there in the hallway outside the closed study door. "He'll have nothing left to stand on." She stood there for a few seconds. Then she walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and waited for him to come out. He didn't know she was home. When he walked into the kitchen 20 minutes later and found her sitting there, the look on his face told her everything she needed to know before he said a single word. She asked him directly. She was not a person who danced around things when it mattered. She looked at him and asked, "Did you marry me to get to my father?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. But she waited for the real one. Rayan didn't lie to her. She didn't know if that was because he couldn't, or because some part of him finally didn't want to. He didn't admit everything either. He didn't sit down and explain his whole history, his parents, his promise at the grave. He just said, quietly, "Your father is not who you think he is." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag and left. She went to her friend Nadia's house. Nadia had known her since they were teenagers, and she had had questions about Rayan from the beginning that she'd been too polite to ask directly. That night she asked them all. Zara didn't have answers to most of them. She didn't file for divorce. Everyone assumed she would, or at least that she should, but she didn't. And when Nadia asked her why, Zara was quiet for a while before answering. "Because he said my father is not who I think he is," she said. "And I need to find out if that's true before I decide anything." Nadia looked at her. "And if it is true?" Zara didn't answer that one. What followed was quiet and painful and slow, the way the truth usually arrives when you've been living close to a lie for a long time without realizing it. Zara started going through things. Old documents her father had, records from around the time the other family's business had collapsed. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly. She just knew she was looking. She called people who used to work for her father's company back then. She found an old accountant who had handled the books for both businesses during the period in question. The accountant was retired now, living quietly, and had clearly been waiting for someone to ask him these questions for a long time. He didn't say much, but what he said was enough. There had been shared accounts. There had been a crisis, and when the crisis came, one man had moved money to protect himself, and the other man had been left to drown. It had not been an accident, it had been a choice. Zara sat in her car outside her father's house for almost an hour before she went inside. She sat there watching the light in the front window and trying to figure out who she was about to talk to, the man she had grown up with, or someone else entirely. When she finally went in, her father was in the kitchen making tea. He turned around when he heard her, smiled, started to say something about dinner. She sat down at the table and waited for him to look at her properly. When he did, he stopped talking. She said, "I need you to tell me what you did." He was 67 years old, and he had been carrying this for 15 years. Whatever he had expected her to say, it wasn't that. The color changed in his face. He put down the cup. He sat down across from her, and he told her. All of it. Not smoothly, not with any kind of prepared speech. Haltingly, quietly, like a man pulling something out of himself that had been lodged in there for too long. He had not meant for them to lose everything. He had meant to buy himself time. He had told himself he would fix it later. He had told himself the other man's family would recover. He had been wrong about all of it and had never gone back to say so because by the time he understood the full extent of the damage, he was too afraid, too ashamed. And the longer he waited, the harder it became to do anything at all. Zara listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, very quietly, "Rayan's father died." Her father nodded. He already knew. His mother died too. Another nod. "And you never reached out?" He looked down at the table. "No." Zara sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up, picked up her bag and said, "I'm going home." She didn't say goodbye. She walked out and got into her car. She cried for most of the drive. Not angry crying, more like the kind that comes when you understand something deeply and wish you didn't. She called Rayan before she reached the apartment. He picked up on the third ring. She said, "I know what happened. I know what my father did, and I want to come home. Can I come home?" There was a silence on the other end of the line that she couldn't read. Then he said, "Yes." What happened when she walked through the door that night was not a dramatic reunion. There were no grand confessions, no sweeping gestures. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd confronted him months earlier, and this time it was Zara who did most of the talking. She told him she was sorry, not because she had done anything wrong, she hadn't, but because she understood now what his family had lost, and because that loss deserved to be acknowledged by someone, and the only person she could offer that acknowledgement from was herself. She said, "I know I'm not responsible for what my father did, but I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry you lost them. I'm sorry no one ever said that to you. Rayan sat very still. He was not a man who was used to being offered things without conditions. He was not sure what to do with sincerity when it came with nothing attached to it. He didn't say much that night, but he didn't leave the table either. The weeks that followed were the strangest of their marriage. They were not suddenly close. They were not suddenly okay. But something had shifted in the air between them. It was no longer entirely dishonest, and that turned out to matter more than Rayan had expected. He watched her differently now, or maybe he watched her the same way he always had, but stopped pretending he wasn't doing it. He noticed how she moved through a room, how she laughed at something on TV, and then immediately looked over to see if he'd caught it too. How she made coffee in the morning, and always, without being asked, made a second cup. He noticed that she was doing something else too, something she wasn't telling him about. She was taking meetings with her father. She was on the phone with lawyers. She was quietly, methodically working on something that involved numbers and documents and her father's company. She never brought it up with Rayan. She just did it, in the margins of her regular life, between everything else. He could have asked. He didn't. He was not entirely sure he was ready to know. 2 months before the accident, Zara had gone to a meeting near a building that Rayan's company partly owned. She'd been looking into some old ownership records, trying to understand the full picture of what her father had taken and what a fair resolution might look like. She wasn't doing it at Rayan's request. She was doing it because she had decided, on her own, that it was the right thing to do. On her way back to her car, someone had hit her. Whether it was intentional or not, she never found out. She ended up in the emergency room with bruised ribs and a mild concussion. The doctor on duty, a calm, direct woman named Dr. Priya, asked her who she wanted them to call. Zara said, "No one. Please don't call my husband. I don't want him to worry." Dr. Priya looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, the way doctors sometimes do when they suspect there is more to a situation than they're being told. But she respected the request. Zara went home, told Rayan she'd had a rough day and was tired, and didn't mention the hospital at all. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in late October. Rayan had been driving home from a work meeting. The meeting had gone fine, but his mind had been somewhere else the whole time. He had been thinking about the plan, about the final steps he could take to push Zara's father's company over the edge, and for the first time in years, he'd found himself sitting with the thought and feeling not satisfied by it, but tired, just very deeply tired. He was thinking about that tiredness when the truck ran the red light. The impact was on the driver's side. His car spun and hit a barrier. The airbag deployed. He was conscious, but trapped. The door had caved in, there was glass across him, and his head was bleeding from where it had struck the window frame. Zara had been trying to reach him. He hadn't answered. He'd been in the meeting, and then in the car, and she'd called 3 times with no response. By the 3rd time, she later said, something just felt wrong. She couldn't explain it more precisely than that. She just got in her car and started driving in the direction of where she knew he'd been. She found the accident before the ambulance did. She pulled over and ran to his car. The driver's door was completely crushed. She reached in through the broken window, carefully, not panicking, just doing the next necessary thing, and found his hand. She held it. She talked to him. She kept her voice steady and said things like, "I'm here. I've called for help. Just stay with me." And she did not let go. At some point, somewhere between her arrival and the ambulance getting there, Rayan looked at her through the broken glass, not quite focused, his thinking already blurred from the head wound, and asked, "Why are you here?" Not where did you come from or how did you find me? Just, why are you here? Like it was a question he'd been carrying for a long time, and this seemed as good a time as any to ask it. She said, "Because you're my husband." He didn't say anything after that. He just held her hand. The emergency crew arrived. The extraction took time. The door had to be cut away. Zara stayed close, staying out of the way of the firefighters but not moving far. The road was wet. Traffic on the other side hadn't fully stopped yet. A car that had slowed but not stopped skidded on the wet road. It caught the edge of the shoulder. It caught Zara. She went down hard. She was unconscious before anyone reached her. Rayan was taken to the hospital with a concussion and 4 stitches above his left eyebrow. The doctors wanted him in a bed. He refused until someone told him where Zara was. When a nurse told him she was in surgery, he went very quiet. He sat down. Then he stood up again. He paced the corridor in a hospital gown, barefoot, bandaged at the head, for 3 hours. Omar arrived and found him like that, and didn't say anything clever. He just walked next to him. At some point during those 3 hours, Rayan said, not really to Omar, more to the empty corridor, "I didn't love her when I married her." Omar didn't respond right away. "I don't know when that changed," Rayan said. "I don't know when she became—" He stopped. Didn't finish. Omar looked at his brother, the man who had built walls around himself for 15 years, who had turned grief into strategy and called it strength, and saw that the walls were down. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. Dr. Priya came out of surgery at around 11 at night. Zara was stable. The surgery had gone well. She would need recovery time, but she was going to be okay. Rayan exhaled. He sat down again. His hands, he noticed, were shaking slightly. Dr. Priya sat down near him. She looked like someone who had been on a very long shift and had one more thing to say before she was done. "She was here before," Dr. Priya said. "About 2 months ago. She came in after an incident near one of the buildings in the business district. Bruised ribs, a concussion." Rayan looked at her. "She asked us not to contact her husband," the doctor said. "She said she didn't want you to worry." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped steadily. Rayan didn't move. "I don't usually share this kind of thing," Dr. Priya said carefully. "But she was here alone, and from what she said, she was there because she was trying to help you with something. That was my understanding of it. I thought you should know." She stood up, said goodnight, and walked away down the corridor. Rayan sat there for a long time after she left. He sat there thinking about a woman who had found out her husband married her for revenge, who had then gone to confront her own father about a 15-year-old wrong, who had then quietly started trying to fix it, alone, without telling him, without asking for anything in return, who had been hurt in the process and had chosen not to mention it because she didn't want him to worry. He thought about her reaching through the broken car window in the dark to hold his hand. He thought about what she'd said when he asked why she was there. "Because you're my husband," said with no bitterness, said like it was just the truth, and the truth was enough. He was in the chair beside her bed when she woke up. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was a bruise along her cheekbone and a bandage on her arm, and she looked tired in a way that went past the physical. He said, "I know what you did. The accountant meetings, the documents, the building." He paused. "The hospital, 2 months ago." She didn't say anything. She just looked at him. "You didn't have to do any of that," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know." He looked down at his hands, looked back up. He was not a man who was good at this part. He had spent 15 years making sure he would never need to be. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the reason I married you. I'm sorry for that." A pause, and then slower, "I'm not sorry I married you." Zara looked at him for a long moment, and then, finally, after months of holding it together, after everything, she let herself cry, not from sadness, from the particular kind of relief that comes when someone finally sees you, properly, after a long time of not being sure they ever would. Rayan reached over and took her hand, the same way she had taken his. The months after the hospital were not simple. Real life is never simple, and anyone who tells you a story where everything gets fixed after one big moment is leaving out the part where you still have to show up the next day and the day after that and do the hard and ordinary work of rebuilding something. Rayan quietly stopped the process of taking over Zara's father's company. He did it without announcement, without explanation to his legal team beyond, "We're stepping back from this." He didn't forgive the old man. He wasn't there yet. Maybe he'd get there eventually. Maybe he wouldn't. But he let Zara handle it, because she had asked him to, and because trusting someone else with the timeline of justice was new for him and he was trying. Her father, for his part, did not make excuses. Zara had made clear to him that excuses were not going to be useful. He met with a lawyer. He liquidated some assets. He set up what amounted to a private restitution, not publicly, not with any fanfare, just a transfer of funds and an acknowledgement on paper of what had happened 15 years ago. It was not nothing. It would never be enough. But it was a start, and it was real. Omar, when he heard all of this, looked at Rayan at a family dinner and said, "You look different." Rayan said, "Different how?" Omar thought about it. "Like yourself. Just like yourself." Rayan didn't know what to say to that. He was still figuring out who that was, honestly. 15 years of grief wrapped in a plan had left him slightly out of practice at just being a person, but he was working on it. Nadia, Zara's friend, who had watched all of this from close enough to have opinions and far enough to be honest, sat with Rayan once while Zara was at an appointment. She didn't say anything sharp. She just looked at him and said, she knew, pretty early on, what you were doing, or at least suspected it. Rayan looked at her. She stayed anyway, Nadia said, not because she was foolish, because she thought you might be worth it. A pause. Try to be. She got up and went to make more tea. Rayan sat there with that for a while. Their 1-year anniversary fell on a Friday. Rayan asked Zara if she wanted to do something. She said she'd like to go somewhere quiet, just the two of them, somewhere they could actually talk. They ended up at a small restaurant they'd been to once before, early in what they thought of as the honest part of their relationship, after the confrontation, after everything, when things were fragile and strange but also, in a way, more real than they'd ever been. They talked for a long time, about small things and then bigger things. At some point Rayan put down his glass and said, not looking for a dramatic moment, just trying to be honest, "I came into your life with a plan. I had the whole thing mapped out, and the plan didn't have room for you actually being a person." Zara waited. "I don't know when you stopped being part of the plan and started being the whole thing," he said. "But somewhere in there, that's what happened." She smiled. The kind of smile that's a little tired and a little full at the same time. "I know," she said. "I watched it happen." He looked at her. "You watched it." "You're not as hard to read as you think you are," she said. "Not to someone who's paying attention. There are people who will tell you that love cannot survive being built on a lie, that if it starts dishonestly, it can never become something true. Maybe that's right, sometimes. But this story suggests that it depends on the people. It depends on whether they're willing to do the harder, slower work of telling the truth after the lie. It depends on whether someone is willing to stay and see it through, not out of weakness, but out of something that looks a lot more like courage. Zara had courage that most people would not recognize as courage because it didn't look like fighting. It looked like patience. It looked like asking hard questions of her own father and sitting with the answers. It looked like going back to a marriage that had hurt her and deciding it was worth trying to understand before giving up on. Rayan had to learn a different kind of courage, the kind that doesn't come from having a plan, the kind that has no roadmap, no outcome guaranteed, no promise of justice at the end, the kind that just says, "I was wrong, and I'm going to stay and do differently, and I'm going to trust that that might be enough." He's still learning. She'll tell you that herself, but she'll also tell you that he shows up every day and tries, and that she has decided, after everything, that showing up and trying is the thing that matters most. People sometimes ask Zara, when they hear pieces of this story, why she didn't just leave, why she went back, why she put in all that work for a man who had originally treated her as a means to an end. She usually gives a simple answer. She says, "Because I saw who he actually was underneath all that, and that person was worth staying for." Then she adds, usually with a small smile, "Also, he makes good coffee now. He's been practicing." Rayan's answer, when people ask him what he learned from all of this, takes a little longer. He says that he spent 15 years thinking that justice would feel like something, like arrival, like finally being able to breathe. He thought that if he could just make things equal, if the man who had taken everything could be made to feel that same loss, something inside him would settle. He says that sitting in that hospital corridor in a paper gown, not knowing if Zara was going to be okay, was the first time in 15 years that he felt something stronger than the plan, and that what he felt was fear. Not strategic fear, not calculated risk, just plain human fear, The kind that comes when you realize something matters to you more than your own anger. I had spent 15 years building towards something, he says, and the thing that actually broke the plan open was just caring about someone. That's it. That's the whole thing. His parents are gone. He cannot give them back. He cannot undo what happened to his family. That is a grief he carries, and probably always will in some form, but he has stopped carrying it in a way that turned it into a weapon. He has learned, slowly, imperfectly, how to carry it as grief instead, which is heavier in some ways and lighter in others. He visits his parents' graves sometimes. Zara has gone with him twice. The first time, she didn't say anything. She just stood beside him. The second time, she brought flowers, not because she knew them, but because they mattered to him, and that was reason enough. He has not forgotten what was taken from his family. He doesn't think forgetting is possible, or even right, but he has learned that holding on and moving forward are not always the opposites they seem to be. You can carry something without being crushed by it. You can remember and still choose a different future. That is, in the end, what this story is about. Not revenge, not even love, exactly, though love is certainly in there. It's about what happens when a person who has closed themselves off meets a person who refuses to stop being open. It's about what happens when the truth finally gets told, by everyone, about everything, and two people decide that the truth, as painful as it is a better foundation than any lie. It's about the fact that people can change, not easily, not all at once, not without someone choosing, over and over again, to believe that change is possible, but they can change, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that is enough. Stowe.